Commander VIX-9 adjusted his bioscanner with 4 of his 7 tentacles, watching the readouts flicker across his optical display. The humans were at it again, and by it, he meant doing something absolutely ridiculous that would somehow work out perfectly in their favor, because that's what humans did. They looked at perfectly reasonable rules, laughed, and then proceeded to break physics just to spite common sense. "Report VIX-9, came the gravelly voice of High Admiral Thek through the communication crystal. The Galactic Council's most decorated military leader sounded tired. 300 years of commanding fleets across 17 sectors, and nothing had worn him down quite like monitoring human training exercises. "Sir, the survival drill has commenced on planet Kepler 442b, VIX-9 reported, his voice carrying that special tone reserved for delivering news that would give his superior another migraine. All participants were stripped of weapons, tools, and technology as per standard protocol. They have 72 standard hours to establish shelter, locate food sources, and signal for extraction. And the humans? VIX-9's tentacles curled in what passed for a grimace among his species. Well, sir, there's good news and there's human news. A long pause crackled through the comm. Give me the good news first. The Altarian team has successfully located a cave system for shelter. The Rigelians have identified 17 edible plant species. The Centaurians have established a fresh water source. And the human news? VIX-9 pulled up the surveillance feed on his main screen. There, in glorious high definition, was recruit Jake Morrison. The human was currently examining a fallen tree branch, with the kind of intense focus that made seasoned military commanders across the galaxy break out in nervous sweats. Recruit Morrison has been crafting. Crafting what exactly? Thek's voice carried a note of resignation that came from years of experience with human unpredictability. Currently, what appears to be a primitive projectile weapon constructed from organic materials found on the planet's surface. VIX-9 watched as Morrison carefully bent a flexible piece of wood, testing its tension. He's calling it a bow. The silence stretched long enough that VIX-9 wondered if the communication had cut out. Finally, Thek's voice returned, lower and more dangerous than before. Did you not inform the humans that weapons were strictly prohibited for this exercise? Oh, yes, sir. Multiple times. In fact, Morrison himself acknowledged the rule and quoted it back to me verbatim. No manufactured weapons, energy devices, or technological implements shall be utilized during the survival assessment period. He was quite cheerful about it. Then what in the 7 hells does he think he's doing? VIX-9's optical sensors zoomed in on Morrison, who was now stringing what appeared to be twisted plant fibers along his wooden contraption. The human's face wore an expression of innocent concentration that was somehow more terrifying than any battle cry. When I confronted him about it, sir, he explained that since the bow is constructed entirely from natural materials found on the planet, and since he crafted it himself rather than manufacturing it, it doesn't technically qualify as a prohibited weapon under the stated regulations. Another long silence. VIX-9 could practically hear his superior's brain processing this information and finding it both completely logical and utterly infuriating. Are you telling me, Thek said slowly, that Recruit Morrison is following the letter of the law while completely ignoring its spirit? That would be an accurate assessment, sir. And is there more? VIX-9's tentacles writhed with anxiety. He's not alone, sir. The entire human squad appears to be enthusiastic about this interpretation. The surveillance feed split into multiple screens. Recruit Lisa Park was weaving what looked suspiciously like a net from long grass fibers. Recruit Tommy Chen was sharpening a stick with a rough stone, creating what was unmistakably a spear. Meanwhile, Recruit Maya Patel was constructing what appeared to be a sling from strips of bark. They're turning the entire planet into their personal armory, VIX-9 observed with a mixture of admiration and horror. What's their current status regarding the actual objectives of the exercise? Thek asked. VIX-9 consulted his readouts. Shelter established in 47 minutes using a lean-to design that's apparently passed down through human military training for centuries. Food sources identified within the first hour, with Morrison claiming he can track and take down anything that moves on 4 legs or flies with 2 wings. Water source located and purified using a filtration system constructed from sand, charcoal, and cloth strips. How long has the exercise been running? 3 hours, sir. The sound that came through the comm could have been laughter or could have been the noise someone makes when their will to live, finally, gives up entirely. Morrison had finished his bow and was now examining a straight branch that he was clearly planning to turn into an arrow. His movements were efficient, practiced, like someone who had done this countless times before, which, knowing humans, he probably had. VIX-9, pull up Morrison's file. Yes, sir. The data streams flowed across VIX-9's display. Jake Morrison, age 26, from a planet called Earth. Previous occupation listed as Eagle Scout and Weekend Survivalist. Oh, indeed. What else? Extensive experience in primitive hunting techniques, wilderness survival, and traditional craftsmanship. Apparently spent his youth learning what humans call bushcraft from his grandfather. VIX-9's voice grew more strained as he continued reading. His psychological profile notes an unusual tendency to find creative solutions to restrictive problems. Of course it does. Thek sounded like he was speaking through gritted teeth. And the others? VIX-9 cycled through the files. Park has a background in textile arts and primitive technology. Chen studied anthropology with a focus on ancient hunting practices. Patel was raised on a farm where, and I quote, making do with what you have wasn't just a skill, it was a way of life. They planned this. It appears so, sir, though technically they're still operating within the bounds of the exercise parameters. On screen, Morrison had completed his first arrow and was testing its balance. The wooden projectile looked crude compared to the energy weapons these recruits normally trained with, but something about the human's confidence as he knocked it to his bowstring made VIX-9's stomachs churn. Sir, what are your orders? VIX-9 asked, though part of him was genuinely curious to see how this would play out. Continue monitoring. If they can actually succeed in hunting with those primitive weapons, I want full documentation. The Combat Development Division will want to study this. Understood, sir. Though I should mention that Morrison appears to be tracking something. Indeed, the human was crouched low, examining marks in the soft earth that were completely invisible to VIX-9's advanced sensors. Morrison's head was tilted, listening to sounds that weren't registering on the audio pickups. He moved with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with his species' reputation for clumsiness. What kind of wildlife inhabits this planet? Thek asked. Standard survey indicates various herbivores, including a deer-like species that locals call forest runners. They're quick, agile, and have excellent hearing. Previous attempts by other species to hunt them using primitive methods have been universally unsuccessful. Morrison stood slowly, his bow held ready. His eyes tracked movement through the trees that VIX-9 couldn't see even with enhanced visual scanning. The human's breathing had slowed. His entire body language shifted into something predatory and focused. Sir, VIX-9 said quietly, I think we're about to find out just how seriously humans take their survival training. Morrison drew his bowstring back in one smooth motion. The crude arrow looked almost comically simple compared to the sophisticated tracking systems and energy weapons that modern military forces used. But there was something about the way the human held himself, the absolute stillness of his form, that made it clear this wasn't a game to him. Time seemed to stretch. VIX-9 found himself holding his breath, all 7 of his hearts beating in an unsteady rhythm. This was supposed to be a simple exercise in resource management and basic survival skills. Instead, they were watching a human attempt something that military analysts had deemed impossible with primitive technology. Morrison released the string. The arrow flew through the air in a perfect arc, disappearing into the forest undergrowth with barely a whisper. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came a sound that made VIX-9's tentacles go rigid with shock, the distinctive cry of a forest runner, followed by the heavy thud of something large hitting the ground. "Did he just—" Thek's voice trailed off. "I believe he did, sir." Morrison was already moving, jogging toward where his arrow had found its mark with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted the outcome. Behind him, his teammates emerged from their own preparations, Park carrying her completed net, Chen hefting his spear, and Patel testing the tension on her sling. "How long until sunset?" Morrison called to his team, and VIX-9 could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "About 6 hours," Park replied, checking the position of the system's primary star. "Perfect. That gives us plenty of time to process this one and track down something bigger for dinner." VIX-9's optical sensors recorded Morrison kneeling beside a cleanly killed forest runner, his arrow having struck with surgical precision. The human was already producing a crude but effective knife made from a sharpened piece of metal scavenged from their transport's landing struts. "Sir," VIX-9 said weakly, "I think we need to revise our assessment of human capabilities in survival scenarios." "You think?" Thek's voice was dry as vacuum. "What's their current status on the exercise objectives?" "Shelter, complete. Water, secured. Food, more than sufficient, with active hunting operations ongoing. Signal for extraction. They've indicated they'd prefer to complete the full 72-hour period for the experience." "Of course they have. Time elapsed?" 4 hours and 37 minutes, sir." The sound Thek made was definitely not laughter this time. "VIX-9, I want continuous monitoring on this situation, and start drafting a report for the Combat Development Division. I have a feeling they're going to want to completely overhaul our survival training protocols." "Yes, sir. Should I also inform them that Morrison has expressed interest in teaching primitive weapons crafting to other species?" "He what?" "Apparently he finds the challenge of working with natural materials refreshing compared to energy weapons. He's offered to demonstrate techniques to any interested parties." The pause this time lasted long enough for VIX-9 to wonder if his superior had simply disconnected in defeat. "VIX-9, Thek finally said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of military experience and the dawning realization that humans were going to revolutionize yet another aspect of galactic military doctrine. "I want you to document everything, every technique, every innovation, every impossible thing they managed to accomplish with sticks and stones." "Everything, sir?" "Everything. Because knowing humans, this is just the beginning." On the surface of Kepler 442b, Jake Morrison wiped his hands clean and looked up at the sky where he knew surveillance satellites were recording his every move. He smiled and waved, the casual gesture of someone who was having the time of his life, doing exactly what came naturally. His teammates gathered around the successful hunt, already discussing techniques for preserving meat, constructing better tools, and setting up more sophisticated hunting strategies. They moved with the easy cooperation of people who had grown up understanding that survival wasn't just about following rules. It was about adapting, improvising, and making the best of whatever situation you found yourself in. As the sun tracked across the alien sky, VIX-9 continued his monitoring with growing fascination and horror. The humans weren't just surviving their survival drill, they were thriving in it, turning what was meant to be a challenging test into what appeared to be a weekend camping trip. And they still had 67 hours left to go. 18 hours into what was supposed to be a grueling survival test, Commander VIX-9 was beginning to question everything he thought he knew about military training protocols. The humans hadn't just adapted to their environment, they had essentially conquered it with nothing more than sharp sticks and an alarming amount of enthusiasm. "Status report," High Admiral Thek demanded through the crackling comm, his voice carrying the exhausted tone of someone who had spent the night reviewing incident reports that defied all logical explanation. "Sir," VIX-9 began, consulting his bioscanners with growing bewilderment, "the humans have established what can only be described as a functional settlement." "A settlement?" "Complete with food preservation systems, advanced shelter modifications, and what Morrison is calling a perimeter defense network." VIX-9 focused his optical array on the human encampment, which now looked less like a survival scenario and more like the foundation of a small town. "They've also begun manufacturing surplus equipment." The silence from Thek's end stretched long enough that several of VIX-9's monitoring systems began running diagnostic checks. "Did you just say surplus equipment?" Thek finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Morrison has completed construction of 6 additional bows, each designed for different hunting scenarios. Park has woven enough netting to supply a small fishing fleet. Chen has created an entire arsenal of spears, knives, and what he calls utility tools. And Patel, ... VIX-9 paused, still trying to process what he was seeing. Patel has somehow constructed a working pottery kiln. A pottery kiln. Using clay deposits she located through soil analysis techniques that apparently don't require any advanced technology whatsoever. She's currently producing storage vessels for water and food preservation. On his main display, VIX-9 watched Maya Patel carefully removing finished clay pots from her improvised kiln, each piece showing remarkable craftsmanship for something created under survival conditions. The human woman was humming while she worked, actually humming as if spending the night crafting pottery by firelight was her idea of recreational activity. "What about the other teams?" Thek asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer wouldn't improve his mood. "The Altarians are still organizing their cave system for basic habitability. The Rigelians have successfully gathered approximately 2 days' worth of plant-based nutrition. The Centaurians are in the process of constructing rudimentary water filtration. And the humans are running a pottery workshop. Among other things, yes, sir." VIX-9 switched his feed to show Jake Morrison, who was currently demonstrating advanced tracking techniques to Tommy Chen. The 2 humans moved through the forest with silent efficiency that made VIX-9's advanced stealth training look clumsy by comparison. Morrison would point to seemingly empty ground, and somehow Chen would nod in understanding, both of them reading information from the environment that VIX-9's sensors couldn't even detect. "They're teaching each other," VIX-9 observed with something approaching awe. "Morrison's sharing hunting knowledge, Park's demonstrating textile techniques, Chen's explaining tool crafting, and Patel's conducting what appears to be a masterclass in primitive manufacturing processes." "Masterclass?" "She's identified 3 different clay types suitable for various applications, located mineral deposits for tempering materials, and developed firing techniques that produce ceramics comparable to industrial standards, all using materials found within a 2-kilometer radius of their landing site." Through his bioscanners, VIX-9 monitored the other team's vital signs and stress levels. The Altarians showed elevated anxiety markers, the Rigelians displayed signs of fatigue and uncertainty, and the Centaurians were exhibiting the physiological indicators associated with resource scarcity concerns. The humans, by contrast, showed stress levels consistent with light recreational activity. "Sir, I'm reading something unusual from the human camp," VIX-9 reported, adjusting his audio pickups to maximum sensitivity. "Define unusual in context of human behavior during military exercises." "They're laughing, sir." The sound coming from the human encampment was unmistakable. Genuine laughter mixed with animated conversation. Lisa Park was telling some kind of story while working on her latest weaving project, her teammates responding with the easy camaraderie of people who were genuinely enjoying themselves. Laughing, Thek repeated flatly. Morrison just made a joke about primitive hunting being more relaxing than combat simulations, because, quote, at least the deer don't shoot back with plasma cannons. His team found this quite amusing. They're treating this like a vacation. That would be an accurate assessment, sir. In fact, Chen has suggested they request extended time on planet for what he called advanced primitive skills development. VIX-9's scanners picked up new movement as Morrison and Chen returned from their tracking expedition. Morrison was carrying 2 more forest runners over his shoulders with casual ease, while Chen bore a selection of small game that he'd apparently taken with his spear and net combination. Food acquisition continues to exceed consumption requirements, VIX-9 reported. Current estimates suggest they've secured enough protein to feed a team twice their size for the full exercise duration. How much time has elapsed? 22 hours, sir. And they're already operating with surplus resources. Substantial surplus, sir. They've begun smoking meats for long-term preservation and have identified several additional food sources they haven't even needed to utilize yet. The surveillance feed showed Maya Patel examining a collection of nuts and berries she'd gathered, sorting them with the methodical precision of someone who knew exactly which were edible, which were medicinal, and which were best avoided entirely. Her movements showed the confidence of accumulated knowledge, rather than desperate experimentation. VIX-9, I need you to run a full analysis on their techniques and document everything for the training archives. Already in progress, sir, though I should warn you, some of their methods appear to violate several laws of physics as we understand them. Such as? Morrison's bow is achieving projectile velocities that shouldn't be possible with the materials he's using. Park's textiles are demonstrating tensile strength far exceeding theoretical maximums for plant fibers. Chen's cutting tools are maintaining edge sharpness despite intensive use on materials that should dull them immediately. And Patel's pottery, fired at temperatures that her improvised kiln shouldn't be capable of reaching, yet producing ceramics with molecular structures that our materials labs would consider impressive. Through the comm, VIX-9 could hear Thek making notes, probably updating yet another report that would be filed under human anomalies in the Galactic Military database. What's their current activity status? VIX-9 consulted his real-time feeds. Morrison and Park are collaborating on what appears to be a more advanced shelter design. Chen is working on tool improvements using techniques he's apparently developing in real time, and Patel is conducting experiments with metalworking. Metalworking? She's located iron ore deposits and is attempting to smelt them using her kiln modifications. Early results suggest she may actually succeed in producing workable metal within the next few hours. With a pottery kiln. A pottery kiln that she's somehow modified to achieve industrial-grade temperatures using nothing but clay, stone, and controlled airflow. Yes, sir. The humans, had turned their survival exercise into what looked like the foundation of a pre-industrial civilization. And they were doing it with the casual efficiency of people who had done this sort of thing countless times before. Sir, there's something else you should know, VIX-9 said, watching his displays with growing amazement. I'm almost afraid to ask. The other teams are beginning to take notice. The Altarians have sent scouts to observe human techniques. The Rigelians are attempting to replicate Park's weaving methods, and the Centaurians have asked Morrison if he'd be willing to demonstrate his hunting bow. Are the humans sharing their knowledge? Enthusiastically, sir. Morrison spent 2 hours teaching basic archery to anyone who asked. Park has offered to show other teams her textile techniques. Chen demonstrated tool-making to a group of very impressed Rigelians. They appear to consider teaching these skills part of the exercise. Of course they do. As if summoned by their conversation, Jake Morrison looked up directly at one of the surveillance drones and waved again. This time, however, he held up his latest creation, a bow that looked significantly more sophisticated than his original version, carved with decorative patterns that somehow didn't diminish its functionality. "VIX-9," Morrison called out cheerfully, apparently aware that the surveillance systems included audio pickups. "Tell Admiral Thek that we've got enough food here to feed everyone if the other teams want to join us for dinner. Maya's working on some kind of stew that smells incredible." VIX-9's tentacles curled in what his species considered profound embarrassment. "He's inviting everyone to dinner, sir." "I heard him." Thek's voice carried a note of resignation that spoke to the fundamental impossibility of maintaining military discipline when dealing with humans. "What's your assessment of their probability of successfully completing the full exercise duration?" "Sir, based on current resource acquisition rates and infrastructure development, I estimate they could successfully maintain their current lifestyle for approximately 6 months without any degradation in living standards." 6 months. Possibly longer if they continue improving their techniques at the current rate. Patel's metalworking experiments suggest they may soon be producing tools that exceed the quality of their issued equipment. The surveillance feeds showed the human encampment as the sun began to set on their first full day. Cooking fires cast warm light over well-constructed shelters, carefully organized work areas, and what looked like the beginnings of a small but thriving community. The humans moved among their creations with satisfied efficiency, each person contributing to tasks that had transformed a wilderness survival scenario into something approaching comfortable civilization. "Final assessment, Commander," Thek ordered. "Are they following the letter of the exercise protocols?" "Technically, yes, sir. They've demonstrated shelter construction, food procurement, water sourcing, and resource management using only materials found on planet. They've maintained team cohesion and shown adaptability to environmental challenges. But they've essentially created a functioning settlement that could serve as the foundation for permanent colonization, using nothing but primitive tools and techniques that they appear to have learned as recreational activities on their home planet. And how do they seem to be handling the stress of the survival situation?" VIX-9 glanced at his bioscanners one more time. All 4 humans showed stress levels consistent with a pleasant day of engaging hobbies. Heart rates were steady, brain chemistry indicated contentment and satisfaction, and their sleep cycles had actually improved compared to their shipboard baselines. "Sir," VIX-9 said slowly, "I don't think they consider this a survival situation. I think they consider this a vacation." The final silence from Admiral Thek lasted nearly a full minute before his voice returned, carrying the weight of someone who had finally accepted that human beings would never make sense according to any reasonable standard. "Commander VIX-9, I want full documentation of every technique, every innovation, and every impossible thing they accomplish over the remaining exercise period. And then I want you to schedule a meeting with the Combat Development Division, the Colonial Planning Committee, and the Galactic Survival Training Board." "Yes, sir. May I ask why?" "Because apparently we need to completely revolutionize our understanding of primitive survival techniques, colonial development strategies, and the fundamental nature of resource management in hostile environments." As night fell over Kepler 442b, Jake Morrison sat beside his team's cooking fire, sharing a meal that would have been impressive in a fully equipped military galley, let alone a wilderness survival scenario. His handmade bow rested against a tree beside him, ready for tomorrow's hunting. Around the fire, his teammates planned improvements to their already impressive settlement, discussing ideas with the enthusiasm of people who had found their element. "You know," Morrison said, looking up at the stars through the clear alien sky, "we should definitely request more exercises like this one. It's nice to get back to basics once in a while." His teammates murmured agreement, already planning their next projects, In the distance, members of other species watched the human camp with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment, trying to understand how 4 individuals had turned a test of survival endurance into what appeared to be a master class in primitive civilization building. Commander VIX-9 filed his final report of the day, noting that the humans had exceeded all exercise parameters within the first 24 hours and showed no signs of slowing down their remarkable transformation of wilderness into home. Tomorrow would bring new innovations, new impossibilities, and probably several more requests from other teams to learn human techniques. But tonight, as the sounds of human laughter carried across the alien landscape, VIX-9 found himself wondering if perhaps the galaxy had been approaching survival training entirely wrong. After all, when humans could turn exile into adventure and hardship into opportunity, maybe the real lesson wasn't about surviving hostile environments. Maybe it was about learning to thrive in them.